A lot of you have dwindled, right? It's like the batch is almost on the verge of completion, right? Almost to the end. What all topics are left?
Governance, IR, then post-independence,
Post-independence, social justice, IR, and governance, and whatever of world history which is left. Okay. So by and large, at least everything for the prelims examination is more or less done. Mhm. Okay, so whatever is left is only from the mains perspective, mostly what are the things which are left. Now, long ago, where we met. Okay, so we had discussed the unification and the three wars. Okay, cool, fine. So when we met, we had discussed about the unification of Germany. And discussing the unification of Germany, we had talked about that how the German unification itself was something which was a long-standing process and it took a lot of time, right? And we talked about the three stages of German unification. We talked about how the economic unification of Germany actually preceded the political unification. And the economic unification of Germany was in the form of Zollverein, where you see that the Prussian capitalist class supported the drive of Bismarck and others to actually carry out the unification. Now, we talked also that the revolution of 1848 was one of the liberal failed attempts to bring about the unification of Germany. And it was later, after 1860, that you see the three major wars which were fought, which ultimately brought about the unification of Germany, and which was in consonance or in agreement with Bismarck's policy of blood and iron. Right. So we discussed all of that. We discussed the three major wars for Schleswig and Holstein, then for the Northern Germanic Confederation, and then for the Southern Germanic Confederation. So we'll discuss all of that. Now, what we're going to do today is firstly quickly talk about Bismarck's foreign policy and also about some of the major events that led up till World War One. But before we do that, what we're going to talk about very briefly also is the Italian unification, because they can also give you a direct question on Italian unification. In terms of 19th century European history, we say that in 19th century Europe, it was Germany and Italy, which were the two major new countries which had come into existence. We've already talked about Germany, but Italian unification is not a very big topic. It's a very brief topic. And I mean, one can study any country's history and as much depth as required, but as much depth as one wants. But from an examination point of view, the direct question, if at all has to come from this, is going to be discuss the process of Italian unification and the role played by Count Cavour, or the Italian Prime Minister, in this situation. Okay, so Cavour played an important role in the unification of Italy. That's what we're going to discuss about. First, after that, we'll talk about Bismarck's foreign policy after 1871 and how and what was its aim, and to what extent it was also partly responsible for the beginnings of what would later eventually result in World War One. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Let's first do about the unification of Italy. Now, in terms of unification of Italy, the direct question that can come in your mains examination is discuss the process of Italian unification and the role played by Count Cavour in this process. So, I mean, there's a direct question. There's no other question which can be made from here. Now, what we're going to look at is that how did Italian unification happen? Now, in terms of Italian unification, what we firstly need to know is, again, the need is actually to see a map. We've not seen a map of Italy anyways. And again, it would be very difficult for you to probably understand it without seeing the map. But before we see the map, what you need to understand, and this is firstly for your understanding, I'll show you an actual map. So that would become more clear there. In the process of Italian unification, or rather you can find that in the PowerPoint presentation, very clearly mentioned, and I've mentioned, labeled all those areas also. So it's easy that way. Now, in the process of Italian unification, we say that there was, we had talked about France, we had talked about Prussia, we had also talked about Austria, right? Now, and there's also obviously Spain. Now, when we talk about Italian unification, we say that there were a number of Italian-speaking areas, but they were always under the control of different countries, okay, or different princely or the different kingdoms also at different points of time. Now, when we talk about two major Italian-speaking areas, one was Lombardia or Lombardy, and the other was Venetia. Now, Lombardy and Venetia, they were two, Lombardy and Venetia, they were two Italian-speaking areas, but they were under the control of Austria. So Austria was the one who had taken over the control of Lombardy and Venetia right from the time of the Treaty of, from the time that we had talked about the Congress of Vienna. So from 1815 onwards, from the Congress of Vienna itself, Lombardy and Venetia were already under the control of Austria. Okay, and these were Austrian territories. But one of the other major Italian-speaking areas, which was an independent state of its own, was Piedmont and Sardinia. Now, Piedmont, Sardinia was another Italian-speaking area that existed, but it was an independent kingdom of its own. Okay. Similarly, there were other Italian-speaking areas also. One of the other major Italian-speaking areas, which was independent on its own, was Rome. Or Rome, where the Holy Rome, which was also the center of the Holy Roman Empire, was also independent of all other players. And apart from this, there was another Italian-speaking area, and this was the Kingdom of Naples and to Sicily. Now, when we talk about Naples and Sicily, Naples was, now this was the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily. Now, when we talk about Naples and Sicily, again, this was another Italian-speaking areas. Now, one of the first thing that you must understand, because that's the only thing that you need to understand, is that most of these Italian-speaking areas were either independent or were under the control of different ones. For example, this Naples and Sicily was under the control of, France. Till before Napoleon also it was under the control of France. When Napoleon came to power, he appointed his relatives in Naples and Sicily. And again, after the overthrow of Napoleon, with the Congress of Vienna, again, you see the Bourbon dynasty is reinstated even in the Naples and Sicily region. So this was under the control of the Bourbon dynasty there, and under the relatives of the Bourbon dynasty. Now, why am I telling you this? Is that the whole process of Italian unification would have to, there were other Italian-speaking areas also, but we are talking only of the major Italian-speaking areas. Now, the process of Italian unification was led by Piedmont, Sardinia. Now, we had talked that the process of German unification was led by Prussia. The process of Italian unification was led by Piedmont, Sardinia, where the independent ruler of Piedmont, Sardinia, Victor Emmanuel II, was the one who was keen on uniting all the Italian-speaking areas together under the leadership of Piedmont, Sardinia. And the drive towards nationalism in Italian-speaking areas had also started from the time of Napoleon itself. Okay, so Napoleon had talked about this idea that same people coming from similar cultures must form a nation state, and this had found some traction in Italian-speaking areas also. And the effort was led primarily after 1848 by Piedmont, Sardinia. Okay, it does not mean it does not mean that before 1848 there were no attempts, but most of the attempts before 1848 were failed attempts. One of the major attempt that happened before 1848 was the Young Italy movement, and it was the Young Italy movement that was started in 1830 by Mazzini. Mazzini started the Young Italy movement in Lombardia and Venetia. This was a Young Italy movement was started in Lombardia and Venetia, where especially the Italian youth-speaking population in Lombardia and Venetia tried to obtain independence from Austria by starting a number of underground movements. But these attempts were crushed by by Austria, which had a superior military power, and these underground attempts did not turn out to be very successful. But there is another important thing here. The other important thing is that Piedmont and Sardinia were ruled by Victor Emmanuel II. It was a monarchy. But in Lombardia and Venetia, when in 1830 Mazzini started the Young Italy movement, the aim was to unite all Italian-speaking areas together under a republic, not under a monarchy. So even though there was an attempt initially, the Mazzini's attempt was to establish a republic with an elected head, not a monarchy. But this attempt did not survive because of the superiority of the Austrian military power. And then you see the next major attempt is made from 1848. In Victor Emmanuel II appointed Count Cavour as the prime minister and tasked him with the primary responsibility of carrying out the unification of Italian-speaking areas under the leadership of Piedmont, Sardinia. Then after 1848, what the first realization that Cavour makes and realizes that Piedmont, Sardinia is actually a relatively small state as compared to Austria. And if at all it had to take control of Lombardy and Venetia from Austria, it could not do so on its own. Okay, and so it would probably require either a direct or an indirect assistance from other players. And also, so that with this realization in 1851-52 itself, Piedmont, Sardinia promised or expressed their support to France and Britain in the ongoing 1853 onwards Crimean War. From 1853 onwards, there was the war in the Crimean region broke out. We're not going to discuss the Crimean War. I'm just telling it to you that at this point of time, France and Britain were already engaged in a war in 1853-54 with Russia over the Crimean region. Okay, and during this war, Piedmont, Sardinia pledged support to Britain and France, even when there was no formal request which was made by Britain and France. The reason was that Piedmont, Sardinia were expressing this keenness to support Britain and France with the hope that if at all, that in the future, if at all any conflict breaks out in which Piedmont and Sardinia finds itself placed against Austria over the question of Lombardy and Venetia, then Britain and France would either remain neutral or would come to the rescue of Piedmont, Sardinia. And that is why in 1853-54, when the Crimean War began, they pledged support to Britain and France. Now in 1858, what you see is that Britain, again, by 1858, Britain had pledged to Piedmont, Sardinia, that in case of outbreak of any war with Austria over the question of Lombardy and Venetia, it will stay neutral. Whereas France had promised that it could come to the assistance of Piedmont and Sardinia if it was attacked by the Austrians. Okay, so in that context, what happens is that in 1858 onwards, in fact from 1848 itself, for almost a decade, Piedmont and Sardinia had strongly focused upon economic development, irrigation, building of roads, etc. Because the idea was to develop Piedmont, Sardinia as a model state, as a state which other areas would look upon and thus would be willing to join the Italy which would be led by Piedmont and Sardinia. So economically, Piedmont and Sardinia, and militarily also, was the more prosperous one. And so that was the case. Now, by 1858, finally, when you see that this kind of indirect agreement has been reached between Piedmont, Sardinia, and Britain and France in 1861, finally, you see that Count Cavour instigated a number of indirect attempts in Austria, in Lombardy and Venetia, to try and gain independence from Austria. However, obviously Austria had a military superior power. So because of that, Austria had a superior military power. And so you see that despite initial attempts made in Lombardy and Venetia, they were again not very successful. But Austria now attacked Piedmont, Sardinia, because it was well aware that Piedmont and Sardinia was fomenting trouble in Lombardia and Venetia region. And Austria attacked Piedmont, Sardinia, and you see that ultimately in this war that broke out in 1861 between Piedmont, Sardinia and Austria, you see that Lombardia was won over by Piedmont and Sardinia. Okay, Lombardia was won over by Piedmont and Sardinia, but Venetia still remained with Austria. Okay, that's there. Now, after this, the next, after this, sorry, so this happened in 1858. In 1861, what happens is the second stage of the unification. The second stage of the unification happened where now Piedmont and Sardinia already had Lombardia. Now Piedmont and Sardinia focused upon Naples and Two Sicily. This was called Naples and Two Sicily, and they focused upon this. To get hold of this, what Count Cavour did was he urged Victor Emmanuel II to provide military support as well as armed assistance to Garibaldi. Garibaldi was another individual, just like Mazzini, who also wanted Italian unification, who also wanted unification in Italy primarily under a republic. So Garibaldi had established, with the support of some 1,000 of its followers, the Red Shirts. And these Red Shirts had aimed to bring about an armed overthrow of the rulers in Naples and Sicily and take over the control of the government there. So at this point of time, when an armed attempt was made by the Red Shirts, Piedmont and Sardinia provided assistance, provided military assistance to Garibaldi, and ultimately Garibaldi was successful in overthrowing the rulers in Naples and Sicily in 1861. But now the question was that Garibaldi wanted a republic, whereas Piedmont and Sardinia wanted Italian unification, but under the monarchy of Victor Emmanuel II. At this point of time, you see that now Cavour advised to Victor Emmanuel II to send in additional troops and forcibly take over power from Garibaldi. But rather than any major war breaking out, Garibaldi himself agrees to a voluntary union with Piedmont and Sardinia. So in the first stage, we saw Lombardia being taken. In the second stage, we see that Naples and Sicily is being taken. Now, in the War of 1871, in the War of 1871, you see that Austria was defeated at the hands of Germany, right? In 1871, the Franco-Prussia, in the 1871 war, sorry, I'm saying not about the 1871 war, the 1865 war that happened between Austria and Prussia had the war, right? And this war was over the Northern Germanic Confederation, the Northern Germanic states. In this war, when Prussia had defeated Austria, so Austria was not only was forced to do away with the Northern Germanic states, but also Bismarck got Venetia released from Austria and handed it over to Italy. Okay, so and handed it over to Piedmont and Sardinia. So in Venetia was handed over by 1865. Okay, because of the war. You remember, right? That we talked that there were three major wars fought between Prussia fought three major wars for the process of unification. The first war on Schleswig-Holstein, the second war with Austria on the northern Germanic states, and the third war with France on the southern Germanic states. So with the second war, you see that when Austria was defeated, Venetia was also handed over to Piedmont, Sardinia by Bismarck. Okay, and now Venetia is going, leaving one of the last major but central Italy region, and that was Rome. And this Rome region was again handed over, or this Rome region united with the rest of the Italian-speaking areas after 1871. When in 1871 you see that Germany is defeating France, and Germany's defeat of France, at the same point of time, Germany also extended a support for the Italian unification. Bismarck extended support even for the process of Italian unification, with which Italy is taking over the direct control of Rome. Rome did not have an army of its own, and Rome was already maintained in a state of relative neutrality, primarily because of French insistence. But once France was defeated, you see that even Rome is being united with the rest of Italian-speaking areas, and we see the process of Italian unification is complete. Okay, so again, you see that this is the whole process. We say that beginning from 1850, that the first stage you see Lombardia is going, the second stage you see that Naples and Sicily is going, in the third stage you see that Venetia is going, and in the fourth stage is Rome. That's it. Okay, and what is the role of and why do we say Cavour is important? Because Count Cavour is very important to the process of Italian unification, because he was a key architect of Piedmont and Sardinia's policy. He also favored developing Piedmont and Sardinia as a model state and focused on economic development, so as to develop it as a modern state, which would as a model as well as a modern state, which would appeal to other Italian-speaking areas which would be willing to join it. So he's both an architect of the foreign policy for Italian unification, but also is the one who actively worked towards the economic development of Piedmont, Sardinia. That's all that we say here. Okay. Now, any doubts in this?
So when Piedmont and Sardinia attacked Naples and Sicily, did France oppose them?
Okay. So the question then comes. The question then comes that, so what is asking is that if Naples and Sicily had a link with the Bourbons, then if Naples and Sicily had a link with the Bourbons, then in that condition, is France not opposing when Piedmont and Sardinia is attacking Naples and Sicily? Well, the answer to that comes from the fact that after the revolution of 1848, again, it was the Napoleonians who were ruling France, whereas in Naples and Sicily it was the Bourbons. Okay, so that was the reason that there was no interference by France in this matter, because in the Napoleon line was ruling in France after 1848 till 1871, whereas here it is the Bourbon dynasty. And so there is, even though they started off same, but that's not how it is at this point of time.
So seeing both the unification process, can we say that as Bismarck is to Germany, he is to the
yeah, so
policies adopted were relatively similar, or?
Okay, so actually from your examination point of view, what is asking is that can we compare Bismarck's policy and Cavour's policy, and can that be asked in the exam? See, we definitely say that obviously Count Cavour is also very central to the unification. He also did not shy away from the use of force in the process of unification. But a direct kind of a comparison between the two is not asked as such, or I mean most of the texts that you'll look at, they're not comparing them as such. That was there any key similarity or key difference? But yeah, you see that both these unifications were the ones which involved the use of force, and both these unifications were also the ones which reflected that the Congress of Vienna's aim of preventing the rise of nationalism were probably falling apart. And so, and one of the reasons why both these processes also involve the use of force is with that in the Congress of Vienna, when there was an opportunity to unify similar speaking, language speaking and cultural areas into a common nation, that was deliberately not done. So that is there. So yeah, I mean, partly there are similarities, but a direct kind of a question comparison has not been, most of the texts do not write them in a comparative format. That's why we're not also writing in a comparative format. Anything else? Okay, so let's quickly write down this. And this is our which class? Fifth class. Okay. Sixth. Fifth. Okay. So when we talk about the unification of Italy, we say that firstly 1830s or during the 1830s, Mazzini led the Young Italy movement. Mazzini led the Young Italy movement and aimed to establish a republic which would head a Italian state, to move towards unification of Italian speaking areas. To move towards unification of Italian speaking areas, Mazzini supported a number of underground movements in Lombardy and Venetia. However, these attempts were crushed with the use of force by Austria. Then we say that in 1848, Victor Emmanuel II, who was the king of Piedmont, Sardinia, aimed to carry out unification of Italian-speaking areas under Italian-speaking areas under Piedmont's leadership. You see that Count Cavour was appointed as the Prime Minister. He played a crucial role in he played a crucial role in the Italian unification process by moving, I'm writing in short, Piedmont, Sardinia towards a path of rapid economic growth, industrialization, and infrastructure construction. Also, B, he extended support to France and Britain during the Crimean Wars in 1854. During the Crimean War in 1854, in return for ensuring neutrality or assistance of these actors in case of breakout of conflict with Austria over Lombardy and Venetia. So, what you see is that in 1858, Piedmont, Sardinia instigated trouble in Lombardia and Venetia, which prompted Austria to attack Piedmont, Sardinia. French came to assistance of Piedmont, Sardinia, who defeated French came to assistance of Piedmont, Sardinia, who defeated Austria to take control of Lombardy. This is the one, you can also say that this is the first step in the unification process. Then we say that the second major step in the unification process is 1861. And here you see this is the second major step. And during the second step, you see that Piedmont Sardinia extended military and naval assistance to Garibaldi's red shirts, which aimed to militarily overthrow the rulers of Naples and Sicily. So, this was done, and you see now once Garibaldi established his control in the region, Cavour advised Victor Emmanuel II to rush in additional troops and take over control from Garibaldi. However, Garibaldi, once Garibaldi established his control in the region, Cavour advised Victor Emmanuel II to rush in additional troops and take over control from Garibaldi. However, Garibaldi voluntarily joined hands with Piedmont Sardinia to further Italian unification. So that's the second major war. The third, as we said, was in 1865. Bismarck defeated Austria over the issue of control of northern Germanic states. Bismarck supported Italian unification and handed over Venetia to Piedmont, Sardinia. Now they say that this is what is, that was Italy already, and the last involved stage involved the unification of Rome. 1865, one could also say, is the third. 1871 is the fourth. The unification of Rome followed the French defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, after which Rome united with Italy. Rome united with Italy. We say that before this also itself, we can say that Italy was established, but finally with Rome coming in, Italy was already before that divided into two parts, northern Italy and southern Italy. Rome was in the center. So with Rome being united, you see Italian unification is complete. And this completed the unification process. See, SPE, please don't read more than what we are doing, because ultimately because we are not students of Italian history, right? So we just need to know enough that probably if the question comes, take for example, see, one of the things is that world history, if they have to ask tough questions, there are relatively more standard areas to pick up from. And just because even we have little or no familiarity with a number of other areas, even a simple question is good enough. Okay, so it's not like modern Indian history where you are already familiar with a lot of things, so they made to search for questions which are not very or which you may not be aware of. Most of the things in world history we are anyways not aware of. So that's the reason. Now, what we're talking about now, everybody's written this much? Now, what we're going to talk about is the next major topic, and here we'll talk about Bismarck's foreign policy also as a part of it, or you can see it as a separate thing also. But there can be two questions of this. One can be a direct question that to what extent Bismarck's foreign policy, to what extent Bismarck's foreign policy succeeded in achieving its objectives, and to what extent it can be seen as a reason for the breakout of World War I. That's the question that can come from this topic. And then we'll talk about other aspects which ultimately led to World War I, or the events and the causes which led to World War I. Okay. So when we talk about Bismarck's foreign policy, one of the first things to know is that Bismarck was continued to be the prime minister from 1871 for the next 20 years up till 1890, after which he resigned. Now, for 20 years till Bismarck was there, Bismarck ultimately had 2 or 3 major objectives of his foreign policy. Now that he had carried out the he had carried on the German unification, and Germany already under Germany with Prussia at its center was already a powerful industrial economy which had started towards industrial revolution from 1830s and 40s onwards. So it was a growing economy, and now what Bismarck said and understood was that if Germany needs to or wants to or wishes to prosper, or Germany wishes to continue to prosper, then it needed peace. It had already carried out the unification, a number of wars had already been fought, and if Germany wanted to increase its economic prosperity, what it needed was peace in Europe to ensure that a market is not disrupted and the economy is not disrupted. And now that Germany was already on the industrial revolution, it could dominate the European market. So the aim firstly was to maintain a period of peace in Europe, so as to ensure that there is a non-disruption of the market, which was useful for Germany. The second aim was that to ensure that France does not try to gang up with other players, or France does not try to cobble up other allies to limit the influence or limit the power of Germany. Given that France had suffered a humiliation in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, there was all the likelihood, according to Bismarck, that France would try to undo the humiliation and would try to probably get back at Germany. And so Germany's attempt was that rather than allowing France to cobble up an alliance, we should isolate France. This was the second aim of Bismarck's foreign policy, was to isolate France diplomatically and militarily, so as to ensure that no other player joins hands with France against Germany. And so that is also partly the reason why Germany was supporting Italian unification, okay, or why Bismarck was supporting Italian unification. Also, you see that after Bismarck carried out the Italian unification process, he speedily moved towards ensuring Austria that it harbors no further territorial expansionist aims towards it, and quickly moved to repair the relations between Austria and Germany. And thus, you see that 1872, in an effort to renew and to restore the relations between Austria and Germany, what he does is that he signs a secret alliance treaty with Austria. Now, that's the first thing that he does after. That's the first thing that he's doing in 1878. Okay, by 1882 he signed another treaty, and by 1882 he signed another treaty, and now he is trying the treaty with Italy. Anyways, with which in whose unification he has played an important role. So in a span of some time, he had signed in 1878 with Austria, in 1882 with Italy, and then in 1887, 78, 82, 87. Okay, 78 से 87 के बीच में, और in a span of 10 years, in 1887, he signed a secret, again, alliance treaty with, or which was called the reinsurance treaty with Russia. So basically, again, if you know what is happening is just so that if you can understand this, again, that what the whole idea is to isolate France and not allow France to join hands with anybody against Germany. So you see that Austria, Germany and Italy and Russia, and then yes, Britain. But except for Britain, yes, Spain was also there. But in terms of which he is signing an agreement with, you see that in 1878 he's doing this, in 1882 he's doing this, and in 1888, in 1887 he's doing this. Now, why is he not signing an agreement with Britain? The reasons are two. Anyways, one of the things is that he was of the opinion that France and Britain already have a long antagonism, right? The Anglo-French rivalry, right? So that history of Anglo-French rivalry was always there, so that close proximity or any kind of an alliance between them seemed unlikely. Secondly, there was a stiff competition between Britain and Germany to establish dominance over the European market. So German and British goods were already in a stiff competition to dominate the European market. So because of both these reasons, you see that Germany did not approach Britain, and you see that Bismarck in a span of 10 years, from 1878 to 1887, had managed to diplomatically isolate France. Okay, so that was also one of the aims. Also, for 20 years of Bismarck's rule, from 1870, from 20 years since Bismarck took over the reins of United Germany, from 1870 to 1890, when he eventually resigned. In this period of 20 years, there was no major fighting which happened in Europe. So again, if the aim was also to probably maintain peace, then this was also served at least for these 2 decades at this time. Then another aim was also to, one of the constant other aims, apart from isolating France or ensuring peace, other aim was also the German domination over Europe. And the German domination over European market as well as over Europe in general, because you see that while Germany kept on signing these secret treaties were in the nature of peace treaties, where there were secret peace treaties or reinsurance treaties, where both the countries agreed that they would come to each other's rescue in the case of likelihood of breakout of any conflict. But on the one side, he kept signing peace treaties. On the other side, he kept on increasing the military expenditure on German army and the German navy, including the German army. So you see that on the one side he was talking peace, on the other side you see the military expenditures also kept on increasing. And more or less, all these treaties were not open treaties. Rather, these were secret treaties, and there was a mutual suspicion throughout Europe that while everybody was talking peace, everybody also increased military expenditure. When Germany increased military expenditure as a response, Britain also was also anyways a predominant European military power. So Britain and Germany also had a competition over naval supremacy, because Britain had a superior navy, but Germany dedicatedly focused towards increasing its naval strength because it saw only Britain as its major contender. So while on the one hand Germany was talking peace secretly with other players, on the other hand Germany was increasing its naval as well as military expenditure, and this again created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion in Europe, that if you talk peace but you keep increasing your military expenditure, then probably that's not a very wise strategy, because it would lead to what? It would lead to suspicion, and in response others would also militarize. So you see that this is also what was happening. Now when we say that what was Bismarck effective, or what was, when we talk about the relevance of Bismarck's foreign policy, we say that yes, in the immediate sense, it did achieve many of its objectives of maintaining peace in Europe, of diplomatically isolating France, and also strengthening the German military strength. However, at the same point of time, it created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion in Europe, which provoked an increase in military expenditures. And as soon as Bismarck resigned, this system of alliances that he had built up broke down, primarily because there was no ideological, there was no long-term strategic vision with which these alliances had been formed. Rather, these alliances were primarily opportunist, in the sense that they were formed only with one purpose: to isolate France. So that is why these alliances, though had been cropped up, framed up by Bismarck, after the resigning of Bismarck, it was found very difficult to maintain these alliances, because there was no long-term coherence or strategic interest or ideological similarity which bound these alliances together. Okay, that's what is said. Now, finally, but why did Bismarck resign? Bismarck resigned in 1891, because the Russian reinsurance treaty, which was signed in 1887, had to be renewed after 3 years, and it was meant to be renewed after 3 years. But the new king, German king, Kaiser William II, was not in favor of renewing the reinsurance treaty, and he said that we are already a powerful military, we are a powerful economy, why should we keep signing these peace treaties and with other players? Rather, we can establish our might on our own. And so he rejected Bismarck's proposal of renewing the reinsurance treaty, and with this Bismarck also resigned. And with the resigning of Bismarck, the fear and insecurity actually increased in Europe, where Bismarck was when in 1890 Russia did not renew. When in 1890 Germany did not renew the reinsurance treaty with Russia, Russia grew suspicious of what were the reasons why Germany was not renewing the treaty. And so you see that because Germany did not renew the treaty, Russia grew suspicious, and that is why you see that in 1894 it is France and Russia who in 1894 formed and signed a secret alliance. So you see that Russia grew suspicious of Germany, and Russia knew who was always looking for somebody to join hands Russia knew who was always looking for somebody to join hands, and that was France. Russia approached France, and Russia and France signed this treaty in 1894. Then in 1904, you see, in 1904, you see Britain and France Britain and France signed a, a treaty in 1904 which was called as the Entente Cordiale. Entente Cordiale. Now, why it is being called as the Entente Cordiale is primarily because of the reason that that it was not it was not a treaty in the sense that they were not the best of the friends. Britain and France had a long history of Anglo-French rivalry. They were not the best of the friends. And to that extent, the aim of signing this treaty was to establish cordial relations, not friendly, but cordial relations between France and Britain. And this was a historic attempt because this signaled that it apparently seemed that France and Britain were willing to get over their historical differences. However, Germany did not take the Entente Cordiale very seriously and probably saw this mainly as a very nominal step which may not actually result in any practical cooperation. And to test whether this was actually the case or not, you see that we will talk about the Moroccan crisis that broke out. Nonetheless, we'll talk about it later. But I'm telling it to you that Germany decided to test whether Britain and France were actually serious about this willingness to work together. And for this, Germany picked up the issue of Morocco. Morocco is in northwest Africa, and it is in northwest Africa, and Morocco then was an independent kingdom. Okay, so France was attempting to take over Morocco as a colony, and the Moroccan king was an independent king. At this point of time, without any direct stake in the region, Germany stated and made a public statement that it would support Morocco in case France made any attempts to attack Morocco. Okay, and this was a statement made even when Germany had no direct stake in Morocco. Okay, so you see that this was to test whether if at all there is that if at all Britain is going to stick behind by France. Then as Germany declared that it would support Morocco, Britain openly declared that it would support France on the Moroccan question. And you see that this is when Germany started taking the Entente Cordiale more seriously. This was the 1906 Moroccan crisis. This broke out again in 1912. That was the second Moroccan crisis, or what was also called as the Agadir crisis. Don't worry, we'll talk about the Agadir crisis again in more detail. I'm just telling you as a broad structure. Okay, so this is also happening, and now what is clear is that Britain and France are also serious about their partnership. And so you see that in 1907 there is the formation of the Triple Entente, where Britain and France were already in the relationship, and France and Russia were already in the relationship. Now it was decided that all the three of them will form a common alliance, and that would be the Triple Entente. And if this was a Triple Entente, the Triple Entente included Britain, France and Russia, whereas the Triple Alliance included Germany, Austria and Italy. So you see that this is the web of interlocking alliances that was built in the region. Germany, Austria and Italy on one side, and Britain, France and Russia on the other side. This is one of the major factors which ultimately led to World War I. But again, in World War I, you will see that Italy actually backed out from supporting Germany and Austria, and rather actually supported the Triple Alliance. Okay, so we'll talk about that, but that's one of the things that you must know at the broad context. Now, from your mains examination point of view, what is the question that is asked from here, or can be asked from here, is that discuss the main causes of World War One, okay, and the main reasons that led to World War One. All these events that we have discussed will part a form of the causes, okay. So we'll write the causes separately, but I'm just telling it to you. So first we'll write down the events. First we'll write down about Bismarck's foreign policy, and then we'll write down the events that led up to World War One. Then we'll talk about the major event that was the immediate cause of World War One, and that was the annexation of the Bosnian region by Serbia, and the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand and all those things. So we'll talk about it. Now let's firstly write about the Bismarck foreign policy, and yeah. Bismarck ka resignation. Bismarck ka resignation, or what is asking is why did Bismarck resign? Bismarck resigned primarily because of two reasons. That firstly, in Bismarck's understanding, it was important to not pursue any further territorial expansion, which Kaiser William II did not agree to. Okay, so Kaiser William II was of the opinion that if we are militarily and economically strong, why should we look for any kind of an alliances? Our major challenge is only the British that we are going to deal with. The second reason was that Bismarck resigned was primarily because Kaiser William II refused to renew the reinsurance treaty signed with Russia in 1887, which was supposed to be renewed in 1890, 3 years later, but they did not renew. Okay, so that's there.
France and Morocco was rivals.
See, Morocco and France were not rivals per se, but Morocco was on the northwest region, almost separated by France by a very narrow territory, sea, right? So you see that France had eyes upon Morocco for a long time. Okay, so this is where they're finding an opportunity to probably intervene and declare it as their own protectorate. But that's why they're actually looking at it from a colonial purpose, not from a contest between the two. Okay, so that's that.
What was the relation between supporting Italian unification by Germany and isolation of France?
What the relation was that Bismarck was supporting the Italian unification. So what he's asking is, what is the relation between Bismarck's supporting Italian unification and the isolation of France? That Bismarck wanted that France should not find any major partners to ally with against Germany, and that is why he had that much of foresight that one should keep the door open with Italy, and that is why you see that he makes that effort to grant over Venetia to Italy. Okay, that's the reason. Anything else? Okay, so let's write down. You can write down a question. See, and one more thing I have to say that whatever we're doing in world history, if you want to read something from books, okay, just please read over, don't read what we have done. If you want to read something, you read what we are not doing in the class. Okay? क्योंकि जो क्लास में कर लिया है, that is enough. No need to go back and read it. So for example, World War I, World War II, मत पढ़िए book से. As long as if you're not clear, if you're like, I probably want a bit more clarity on that, only that part you read, if at all that's the case. Otherwise, World War I, World War II पढ़ने की ज़रूरत नहीं है book से, because we are already covering that. If you want to read something from the book, then probably decolonization decolonization ने जो 2-3 years they've probably eaten our head with decolonization too much. Probably the logic is that so if you want to focus your energy on something, you focus your energy on these things. Some things like Latin America, something on some aspects about Latin America, mostly in the Cold War era. You focus on the Cold War. Okay? क्योंकि बाकी सब तो मैं आपको वैसे ही क्लास में इतना डिटेल में करा दे रहा हूँ कि आपको नहीं, you will not need the time. Okay? And you don't need to run for it. आपको आपका जो विजन प्रिंट आउट मटेरियल है देयर इटसेल्फ यू विल फाइंड मोस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स, सो नो नीड टू रन फॉर बुक्स एनीवेयर. Most of the books that you'll actually pick up also don't cover this Cold War era very properly. Okay, so that's there, but in the vision material you will find ample amount. So what I'm saying is, if you want to read, you focus on those areas from the vision handout, the printout material that you get for world history. But the rest areas you can blindly not look at anything else also, it would work, because for everything that I'm doing I'm dictating. There's also a PowerPoint presentation, so that should more or less work. Okay, so now the question that you can write is, discuss the key objectives of Bismarck's foreign policy to what extent could this be seen as a reason for outbreak of World War I? For outbreak of World War I. So when we talk about Bismarck's foreign policy, we say that from 1870 to 1891, that is till his eventual resignation, Bismarck's foreign policy had the following aims. A. To maintain relative peace in Europe, which would allow Germany to dominate European markets. B. To establish German supremacy over Europe, and to establish German supremacy over Europe, the key challenge to achieve the same came from Britain. C. To diplomatically isolate France, which would inevitably attempt to diplomatically isolate France, which would inevitably attempt to undo the humiliation of defeat of the Franco-Prussian War of 1871. To achieve these aims, Bismarck adopted the twin policy of A. Putting up a number of secret alliances with its neighbors to isolate France. For example, we say that in 1878, you see in 1878, we see that Austria and Germany signed an agreement. In 1882, Austria-Hungary and Germany signed an agreement. In 1882, Austria-Hungary and Germany signed an agreement in 1878. In 1882, sorry, yeah, my. So in 1878, we say that Germany is signing in 1878, in 1882 and in 1887, three major agreements that Germany is signing. The first, देखिए आप लोग मुझे मत कंफ्यूज करिए, ठीक है ना? I had written the dates. Ajat, I was writing right. Please don't drag me into it, right? And that's what I was thinking. And I'm writing right. And these people are saying that probably then. So yeah, 1878, 1882 and 1887. हर 5 साल के बाद they're signing treaties. That's how you remember. And the first reason, there is a reason why they're signing it in 1878 with Austria also. Okay? And the reason comes from the fact that the first immediate aim of Germany was to ensure that Austria does not join hands with France. Because if Austria would have joined hands with France, it would have been a much bigger trouble for Germany. So, you see that Germany and Austria signed an agreement. Then you see that Germany and Italy signed the agreement in 1882, and finally in 1887, the reinsurance treaty was signed between Germany and Russia. So to achieve these aims, the Bismarck adopted the twin policy of signing these secret alliances, and B, to increase the German military expenditures, especially the naval expenditures. Especially the naval expenditures. So you see that with these two major steps, However, one of the last points here. However, relations between Kaiser William II and Bismarck deteriorated as the monarch was keen on expansion and not on maintaining the alliance system. In 1890, Kaiser William II refused to renew the reinsurance treaty with Russia, and this led to Bismarck's resignation. So, to what extent then can we say that Bismarck's foreign policy was successful, or this we say that Bismarck's foreign policy was successful? Partly it was successful, but partly it was also responsible for the breakout of World War I. That we say that Bismarck erected an opportunist opportunistic, temporary and unstable secret alliance system which held on till he was in charge. However, the system soon broke down following his resignation. Moreover, the military expenditures, the increase in military expenditure and the secret alliance system had created an atmosphere of fear and instability in Europe that eventually led to World War I. That eventually led to World War I. So, clear this much? Okay. So, everybody written? I think from the time that yours was the first batch we discussed modern Indian history. Right? So since then, I've managed to cobble up a few more history videos for Indian history because they are relatively a bit more difficult to get. So that's something that also probably we can look at. Also, आपको थोड़ा सा distraction भी हो जाएगा, and probably that some one of those can actually be turn out to be useful in prelims also. Okay, so आपको थोड़ा सा 5 मिनट बीच में you'll get a breathing space, and then we'll again continue on that. Now, you remember we had talked about tribal. We had talked about tribal movements, and we had talked about Birsa Munda as well, right? So one of the things about Birsa Munda is that he did, obviously I told you then also some of the points about him, but there's a small video about him which can also give you some of the points which are relatively important from prelims, something that we had not discussed then. So
Before Bhagat Singh was even born, before Gandhi started his freedom struggle, it was Birsa Munda who had managed to spook the British. A revolutionary from Chota Nagpur division in present-day Jharkhand, Munda is the only tribal leader.
okay, so there's a perpetual sound issue, I guess. Typical. So, okay, what else overall apart from this? See, your classes are getting over by? January 10th. Okay. So, I mean, you have ample amount of time for your optional. I mean, yeah, you have the optional, but even if, even for 2 months, you know, for at least when, you know, even obviously if you're writing the prelims for the first time, I would say that yes, you must be a bit more conscious about prelims, because agar prelims doesn't happen, then it is a bit, at times you feel obviously very let down. You've been in the process for long, etc. So, but then also you still have a good 2 months till then, no, not 2 months, at least 1 month where you can still focus more on your mains as an optional or anything. And then probably after January or something, that you can focus on both prelims as well as mains, or focus more on the prelims. So, start करके देख लीजिए.
Before Bhagat Singh was born, before Gandhi.
चलो ठीक है. अरे माइक से नहीं चला रहा, माइक से चला रहा. कहाँ पे स्पीकर्स में? Okay, cool. So just be a bit quiet. Okay.
Gandhi started his freedom struggle. Bhagat Singh was even born, before Gandhi started his freedom struggle, it was Birsa Munda who had managed to spook the British. A revolutionary from Chota Nagpur division in present-day Jharkhand, Munda is the only tribal leader whose portrait hangs in parliament. He was just 25 when he died in the custody of the British. The British rule had dismantled the ways and lives of the Santhal and Munda tribes in the Chota Nagpur plateau region by introducing the concept of rent for the land and taxes on the produce.
Some internet issue also. I guess there's some.
With the British, the
So, yeah.
zamindars were able to acquire most of the tribal land, some of whom owned as many as 150 villages, while the Mundas ended up becoming their bonded laborers. The Santhal rebellions of the 1850s had had limited success as they were brutally crushed by the British with their superior firepower. But Birsa Munda unleashed a series of concerted attacks on the British using guerrilla warfare tactics. The revolt, called Ulgulan or the Revolution for Justice and Independence, claimed the lives of many British police officers. In 1900, the British attacked the Munda warriors assembled at Dambari Hills, killing hundreds of them with indiscriminate firing. A few months later, Munda was captured while he was asleep in the Jamkopai forest near Chakradarpur town in what is now called Jharkhand. According to some accounts, Munda was tortured in prison, where he died on June 9, 1900. The rebellion forced the British to enact the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act in 1908, which restricted the transfer of Adivasi land to non-Adivasis. But since then, various attempts have been made to amend the CNT Act by successive Indian governments to grab the forest land. While on the one hand the government appropriates the legacy of Birsa Munda, it is trying to dilute the provisions of the very act that the revolutionary laid down his life for. This is a painting of a battle between the British East India Company forces and the Kingdom of Mysore, led by Colonel William Bailey on one side and Tipu Sultan on the other, in Polelur near Kanchipuram, Tamil Nadu. It was the worst defeat dealt to the British in India till then. A cursory glance at the painting will reveal why the British suffered such heavy losses. It was the rockets. One of them had landed in Colonel Bailey's ammunition stores, contributing to the rout. Whether they are used to send satellites into space or used by countries to terrorize each other, all rockets in the world can be traced to those used during the wars in Mysore. Tipu Sultan was a technology buff, learned in science and mathematics. He improved upon the rocket technology used by his father Hyder Ali. The use of rockets had been around for a long time. The Chinese are recorded to have used them in the 13th century and the Europeans in the 14th and 15th centuries. But the Mysorean rockets were much more advanced as they used iron cylinders to store the propellant, instead of bamboo and paper that the Chinese and Europeans were using. Tipu's rockets consisted of an iron tube 6 centimeters wide and 20 centimeters long, attached to a 3-meter long sword or bamboo. While some would burst in the air, others with their swords attached would slice through enemy lines like a flying scythe. Use of iron enabled higher bursting pressure, leading to higher thrust and longer range. Tipu had a corps of 5,000 rocketeers who could launch them rapidly using a wheeled cart. However, despite his rocket wizardry, Tipu wasn't that lucky in the 4th Anglo-Mysore War. This time, the British army, led by Arthur Wellesley, was able to breach Tipu's citadel of Srirangapatna. Ironically, because of a pile of rockets that exploded inside the fort from an English cannon shot. After Tipu was killed, the British took back with them 600 launchers, 700 usable rockets, and 9,000 empty shells that they found in the fort. 2 of them can still be seen at the Royal Artillery Museum in London. In England, an inventor by the name William Congreve adapted the Mysorean technology and came up with the Congreve rocket. These rockets would go on to win Britain the Napoleonic Wars, help in the bombardment of Copenhagen, and lead to the fall of Washington in the Anglo-American War of 1812. While Tipu Sultan's legacy in India is a complex one, there's no doubt he was the original rocket man.
So, yeah, the one, okay. So, one of the things that is important from your prelims point of view is about Birsa Munda and about Ulgulan and the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act, because that's a direct consequence of his efforts. So that is important because they can also give you a question in the prelims examination on Birsa Munda. So I mean there's a chance or a likelihood that it can probably be there. Now that is why so there are a couple of more, probably we can see that later. Now अभी देखना है. So but it'll probably okay, so let's come back to what we were discussing. In terms of Tipu Sultan and everything, it's more from an interest point of view. But also it tells you that one of the things it does tell you that technology is something which requires any technological advancements requires a constant support as well as a constant improvement. And in the absence of which, you will find that there will not be any major technological growth. I mean, if Tipu Sultan was responsible for it, later Indian rulers neither adapted his technologies or neither did work on it. The British worked on it and the British improved on it. The Indian princely states could have probably done the same. But the fact was that the Indian princely states were more or less not that interested at that point of time pursuing technological progress, specifically in this context. And this is also one of the reasons that we see is the reason for the eventual decline for a number of these states also. Now, yeah.
Now recently government declared the Paika rebellion as the first war.
No, Paika rebellion and all, you can probably just Google it a bit and read on your own. But there is nothing like that. This is the first war of independence or anything. Okay, it's just see the point is, it's not as if you remember we talked about war of 1857. Then also we said that merely the overthrow of British is not independence, right? So I mean, one can always debate on sir ये भी कह सकते हैं, इसको भी कह सकते हैं, उसको भी. So it's partly political. It's got nothing to do with something that is from your examination point of view. Now, the next thing to talk about is also is the events that led up to World War I. Okay. Now, so events that led to World War I. When we talk about events that led to World War I, we'll write in a chronological order about that. Firstly, till 1891 we've already talked. Now in 1894, firstly you see that in 1894, France and Russia entered into an alliance. Once Germany refused to renew the reinsurance treaty, in 1891, then you see that in 1904 there was the Entente Cordiale that was established between France and Britain. Also, I'm telling you here itself that, and we'll discuss this in more detail, that in 1904 Japan defeated Russia over the issue of colonial control, and we'll talk about Japan separately, okay? So, and Japanese imperialism and the Meiji restoration, all of that, we'll talk about it. So, but separately, Japan defeated Russia over the issue of control of Manchuria. The Manchurian region was what you today see as partly as the Mongolian region. Okay, so this, yeah, so on the eastern coast of China, it was a mineral-rich region which Japan had keenly sought, primarily because Japan had also started undergoing the Industrial Revolution and was looking for an assured supply of raw materials. And Manchuria was a valuable territory which could afford to do the same. We'll talk about it more when we'll talk about Japan and also a bit about Russia later. But Japan defeated Russia, and this was a big deal then, primarily because Japan was an Asian country. Russia was a powerful European kingdom at this point of time and was considered militarily a very big power. But the Japanese success in defeating Russia was seen as a reflection of A, the rise of Japan as a major military and an economic power, and B, about the falling or about the decline of the Russian military strength. So both these things were reflected in Russia's defeat. And this was the first time also when a European power was defeated at the hands of an Asian country. Okay, Japan was the first Asian country to undergo a industrial revolution. We'll talk about Japan more separately. So that's there. Now 1900 and so Japan defeated Russia over the issue of control of Manchuria, and this signified a rise in military and economic might of Japan, which had managed to defeat the Russian Empire. And B, it clearly showed Russia's declining might. It clearly showed Russia's declining might militarily and economically. Now, because Russia till 1904 had still not undergone an industrial revolution. It had made no major efforts to modernize its army either. Okay, so you see that Russia was thoroughly defeated in this war in 1904. Now, the next important thing to also talk about is the period from what we see is that with the signing of this in 1906 is the first Moroccan crisis, where Germany declared its support for the Moroccan ruler who was threatened by colonial aims of France. Britain by colonial aims of France. Britain had already declared support for French position in response to German support for Morocco. This convinced Germany that the Entente Cordiale was a definite attempt to isolate it was a definite attempt to isolate Germany. Now, then you see that in 1907 is the Triple Entente that composed of Britain, France, and Russia that came into existence. And this was pitted against the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria, and Italy. Germany, Austria, and Italy. Thus, Europe was divided into an interlocking alliance system that made the possibility of a European war extremely likely. See, if there would not have been such an alliance system, say France and Germany would have been in a war, and if the alliance system would not have been there, and if an alliance system would not have been there and France and Germany would have been in a war, the war would have largely remained bilateral. But in the presence of an alliance system, even a bilateral issue would easily flare up to become a regional issue, okay, or a regional conflict. So alliances can be good and it can be bad as well, because if at all, alliance systems may promote safety, but may also result in drawing one country into the war, which may not be of a direct interest to them. But given that they are in alliance, they may be drawn into such a war. So that is why you see that alliances are not very simple things, okay, and they may or may not work to the advantage of any of the players. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about is predominantly the reason from is predominantly the region is the next thing that we're going to talk about is predominantly the period from 1908 to 1914. Now, in 1908, please leave silently. Okay, so predominantly from 1908 to 1914 is the period that we're going to talk about. And in this period, you see that there are a number of things happening which immediately become the cause for the war. And we're talking about those events first, and then we'll put them together in the form of causes later. Now, in terms of events, we say that in 1908, there is the breakout of the Bosnian question. Okay, and this is the first time when there is a breakout of the Bosnian question, where Bosnia had already so just to firstly explain it to you that here, if there was Germany, below it was Austria. Austria-Hungary was a multi-religious, multi-ethnic and a multi-linguistic state to begin with. And out of this, and because of this, you see that there were a number of different religious and different linguistic groups also which had existed in the region. And we say that apart from this, Germany and Austria-Hungary being together, what you see is that one of the contested areas was the region of Bosnia. Bosnia was a region which contained a number of people who were the Serbian-speaking people and who belonged to the Slav race or the Slav dynasty. Okay, so there used to be a Slav dynasty here, which would exist in Eastern Europe in the Balkan regions. Okay, and this basically had existed often from the Austrian Empire to the Ottoman Empire. But nonetheless, what you see here, what we need to know from our examination point of view, is that Serbia had often claimed the control of Bosnia, but Bosnia had been made a protectorate of Austria. Okay, Bosnia was a protectorate of Austria from a eventually long period of time. It was an autonomous region under Austria, not a part of Austrian Empire, but only a protectorate that was under the control of Austria. And a long-standing demand of Serbian nationalists was to unite with other Serbian-speaking population that was located in the Bosnian region. So they wanted Bosnia to be united with Serbia. But Austria-Hungary had went ahead, and despite these concerns and these long-standing demands of the Serbian people, had gone ahead and completely annexed Bosnia in 1908. Now, why did they do so? Is because Austria already had a blank check from Germany, where Germany had made it clear that it would support Austria in case of any outbreak of conflict over the Bosnian question. However, if Germany had pledged its support to Austria over the Bosnian question, the Serbs had also received a pledge of support from Russia. Russia had pledged support to the Serbians on the Bosnian question, primarily because as a race, the rulers of Russia and the Serbs came from the same race, the Slavic race. Okay, and so they had a number of racial and cultural links with the Serbian population, because of which the Russian ruler had already pledged support, had pledged support to Serbia over the Bosnian question. However, this support that Serbia was pledged by Russia did not materialize into an actual support, primarily because, and even though Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia in 1908, Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia, Russia did not come to the support. Russia did not come to the support of Serbia, primarily because Russia had already faced a huge military defeat in 1904 at the hands of Japan. So Russian weakness had already been exposed in Russian defeat of Japan, and Russian defeat at the hands of Japan in 1904 had also made the king extremely unpopular in Russia. Russia was actually already lagging behind in industrialization. It was even in 1904 the last major European country which had still not started a major push towards industrialization. It was still the agricultural productivity was still low, unemployment was still high, and on top of that, they had lost out on the war in 1904, primarily because the Russian monarchy or the Tsarist regime did not modernize its military either. So Russian weakness was exposed in 1904. The domestic public opinion was not in favor of indulging in any war, which was of not any direct stake or interest to the Russian. So in Russia, the popular sentiment was against involvement in any further wars, and that is why in 1908, even when Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia, Russia did not come to the rescue of Serbia. And this is what you see as is that this was a major, again, but even though Russia did not come to the rescue of Serbia, this was again a major humiliation for Russia, in the sense that in 1904 they had been defeated at the hands of a much smaller Asian country. Then in 1908 they had failed to keep their word on the Bosnian question, and this was again seen as the fact that Russia was probably declining was probably a declining power, which was not as at its best. Okay, so 1908 also proved that the Russian state of affairs was in a very poor stage, and this was reflected because of the reluctance of Russia to interfere or to intervene on behalf of Serbia in the question. And you see that Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia. However, the matter did not end there, and within Bosnia, a number of Serbian nationalists and a number of militant groups in Bosnia which were in favor of uniting with Serbia continued to demand independence and demand a unification with Serbia, which ultimately resulted in the situation that a number of militant nationalists in Bosnia assassinated the Austrian Prince Archduke Ferdinand, and in 1914. On June 28, 1914, the Austrian Prince Archduke Ferdinand had reached Bosnia and Bosnia's capital Sarajevo, and there you see he was attacked by the black shirts, and you see that ultimately this was on June 28, 1914. The Austrian Crown Prince was attacked. He was the second in line to become. He was the next in line to become the Austrian king, and he was assassinated by these Serbian nationalists in Bosnia, and this became a huge matter of dispute because the Austria blamed the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand on Serbia, saying that Serbians or the Serbian government has been indirectly funding these terror activities in the Bosnian region. But Serbia denied responsibility for this and said that those who are held guilty, if and when found, would be punished. But Austria did not buy this assurance, and that is where you see a month later, from July 28, 1914, the breakout of World War I. But how did World War I exactly break out is important to understand who is responsible for World War I, which is a very difficult question to settle, because there is no one individual, one reason or one instance which is responsible. But when we talk about the immediate cause, we say that Austria-Hungary, which had annexed Bosnia over the issue of assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, attacked Serbia. Okay, and their attack of Serbia, they attacked Serbia, and when Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia, you see that Germany came to the rescue of Austria-Hungary, and Germany attacked Russia, and Germany attacked France, because Russia and France were already in a treaty. So Germany attacked both Russia and France together. Okay, so July 28, 1914, the war broke out. On August 1, Germany attacks France and Russia. So it seems, if we look at it, just for your interest sake, I'm telling you, that it seems that it is Germany which is the key aggressor and which is, attacking both France and Russia. But the reality is a bit more complex than this. Primarily because it took 1 month. It took 1 month from June 28th to July 28th. It took 1 month for the war to break out. On top of that, when the war broke out on June 28th also, by that time, Russia had already mobilized its troops to the border of Germany and Austria. They had already mobilized their troops to the border of Germany and Austria, but they had not declared war. Okay, and they had not attacked, but they had already mobilized their troops to the border, which was seen by Germany as a move towards an eventual attack. So rather than waiting for others to attack, Germany simply attacked. Okay, and why did Russia intervene? Because Russia intervened because in 1908 it had failed to come to the rescue of Serbia on the Bosnian question, and now Serbia was being annexed by, Serbia was itself being annexed by Austria. So that's the reason why eventually Russia comes to the rescue, and that is where you see is the beginning of World War I. Now when we talk in terms of causes, these are the events, but when we talk in terms of causes of World War I, we say that there are a couple of main causes. Okay, that the first major cause is that from 1870s and 80s itself, there is this aggressive nationalism which has found its feet in Europe, where every country is trying to militarily expand or territorially expand. In fact, there was a bitter contest even in North Africa to expand and to establish their colonial presence in the region. For example, you look at Tunisia, that was to become a French colony. For example, you look at Egypt, that was to come under the control of Britain. So you see that there was a bitter contest, whether it was Britain, whether it was France, whether it was Germany, all were looking to territorially expand. And the strength of a nation, in aggressive nationalism, the strength of a nation is often defined by their military strength and also by the number of colonies that they possess. So 1800s onwards, you see that there is 1870s and 80s onwards, there is a dedicated push towards rapid territorial expansion and towards aggressive nationalism. Also, this is why you see a dedicated push towards increasing military expenditures. Also, you see is the role of the press here, because the press often, for example, in the Moroccan crisis or in the second Moroccan crisis also that happened in 1912, you see the press often said that the European press often was the one which actually played a very important role in the sense of war propaganda. In the sense that any party, whether it was Britain or France or Germany, if it was to talk about negotiations and talks to resolve a matter, this was seen as a sign of weakness. So aggressive nationalism also found a place in the press, where you see the press became a mouthpiece of aggressive nationalism, where any talks of reconciliation and peaceful resolution was seen that one was not militarily prepared to defend themselves, often making it difficult for governments to get into a peace negotiation if this was seen as a sign of weakness. Then also, obviously, you see that the immediate cause is the Bosnian question. Then you also see one of the major causes is the competing interlocking system of alliances that actually would result in a bilateral dispute. So, I mean, exactly what is the issue? The issue is between Austria-Hungary and Serbia over Bosnia. All of a sudden you see that Germany is jumping in the war, Russia is jumping in the war, France is jumping in the war, and then eventually Britain also jumps in the war, and we'll talk about it. Now, it is only an issue between two countries. And again, if you look, that it's not merely that, and that is why we say that it's not merely because of this issue, that the Bosnian question, that the war broke out. It's also because of a multitude of other factors, that a small bilateral dispute or a bilateral dispute became a larger regional conflict. Suppose India and Pakistan have a war on the Kashmir issue again. Do you expect that Nepal, Bhutan, China, Nepal or Bhutan or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, they will also jump into the war? So again, what is pushing this into a wider European war is not merely this Bosnian question, but a number of other multitude of factors as well. Okay, so that's there. And also one of the last things was that Germany wanted to establish its supremacy over Europe, and to Germany the biggest competition was only Britain. So this is also the time when you see that Germany is trying to level scores with Britain, that we'll talk about. So these are all the major causes. Let's write down about the events and the causes. Now, so when we say that in 1908, Austria annexed Bosnia, which was a protectorate under it. This happened despite long-standing demands of Serbian nationalists to unite with Bosnia. This happened despite long-standing demands of Serbian nationalists to unite with Bosnia.
What is the actual
Protectorate as an actual meaning means that it is an autonomous provision. It is an autonomous territory, but which would be under the overall protection of the country or of Austria. So if Bosnia was to be a protectorate of Austria, then Bosnia was to be largely autonomous, but under the protection of Austria for if at all there is an outbreak of any military conflict. And that would also, in reality, protectorate would also mean that indirect influence would always be that of the country who is protecting the protectorate. Okay, so that's the thing. So one of the things is that Austria annexed Bosnia, and despite openly pledging support to the Serbian nationalist cause, Russia did not come to the rescue of Serbia in 1908. This was primarily due to the domestic public opposition, in Russia after the humiliating defeat of 1904 at Japanese hands, not to intervene in any issue, not to intervene in any issue which did not affect Russia directly. So that's something that happens. And then one of the things we also say that by 1914, all the countries were already nursing a grudge against the others. Russia was already nursing a grudge on the humiliation of 1908 on the Bosnian question. Germany was nudging a grudge on the Moroccan issue in 1906, and again, second time again on the Moroccan issue again in 1912 when there was a second Moroccan crisis. And Germany anyways also wanted to extend its superiority over Britain. Okay, and Serbia was already Serbia also wanted to undo the humiliation that they had also faced in the Bosnian question before, but that does not happen. So you see that there was a constant amount of inability to come to terms with the past in the sense of undoing the humiliation of the past events also. So in 1912 we say the second Moroccan crisis happened, and this was also called as the Agadir crisis. Now, what happened in the second Moroccan crisis was that France finally decides to annex Morocco, and at this point of time, Germany does send in military support or sends in military support to Morocco, but ultimately withdraws. And you see that it does not result in a full-fledged war or anything, but Germany does send in a military support which is initially sends in a military support which is eventually withdrawn, and there is no major conflict which breaks out or a war which breaks out. But you see that France ultimately takes Morocco as a colony, and Germany, which had so-called pledged support to Morocco, is found doing nothing about it. So that's again a humiliation for Germany as well. Now, what do you see that in 1908? So again, in 1908, a full-fledged war was averted. In 1912 also, there was a possibility of a breakout of war between Germany and France. That was also averted. And finally, something happens in 1914. If you look at it, probably there was a better reason in 1912 to fight rather than 1914 for France and Germany. But that's not how it breaks out. But you also see that Europe is probably avoiding one conflict after the other, but in reality is doing nothing to address the underlying substantive problems which ultimately resulted in the war. So in the second Moroccan crisis, Germany failed to provide adequate military support to Morocco, which was eventually annexed by France. So this, yeah. Why did the war not start is primarily why in the Moroccan question there is no major war that breaks out, primarily because the Germans backtrack at this point of time because they had no direct stake. They are not saying that they are going to annex Morocco, right? They are only saying that we are supporting their independence. Why to get into a war to support somebody's independence is the question. You see that, so I mean on the face of it, yes, they were professing the support, but in reality they were not serious about, because what, in Russia also it's a monarchy, okay, and there's nothing like republic or anything that they're standing for, or that they're actually intervening on that issue. Their only aim of intervening in the Morocco crisis was to test Britain, and now they were being tested, okay, so that's there. So because in this, it's not that Germany sent in the troops first. It was France who had sent in the troops first. Now Germany was sending in a response later, but this response also was half-hearted and they eventually withdrew rather than entering into a full-fledged war. So now, which was eventually annexed by France. This was a major humiliation for Germany in the region. And then finally, in 1914, you see the immediate cause for breakout of World War I was the assassination of Austrian Prince Archduke Ferdinand. The assassination of Austrian Prince Archduke Ferdinand in Bosnia on June 28th, 1914 by Serbian nationalists. The assassination of Austrian Prince in Bosnia on June 28, 1914 by Serbian nationalists became the immediate cause for outbreak of World War I as Austria blamed Serbia for this act of terror and attacked Serbia on July 28, 1914. On 1st August 1914, Germany attacked Russia and France simultaneously. And you see the beginning of World War I. Now,
Germany was maintaining control over Bosnia, and still they were supporting Serbia for their autonomous.
Now what is happening? So, see, what is happening here in 1914 is that Russia is coming to the rescue of Serbia because Serbia is being attacked by Russia. Serbia is being attacked by Austria and Hungary. Serbia is being attacked by Austria and Hungary, and that is why Russia is coming to support of Serbia. Now it's not on the Bosnian question; it's actually on the Serbian question now. Okay, so that's the thing. Now the next thing that we have to talk about is predominantly the period or is to talk about is the causes of World War I, where we can just simply put them together. One, and I'm not writing them in detail, I've given that in the PowerPoint presentation. I'm just pointing out the broad points. One is the rise of aggressive nationalism throughout Europe in search of colonies. The second major one, so that's the first major cause. The second major cause is the competing web of interlocking alliances which could easily turn a regional issue into a wider European one. Regional issue into a wider European one. Okay, so that's there. The third also, as a major cause, apart from aggressive nationalism and the web of interlocking alliances, we say is the role of press, which with its aggressive propaganda often portrayed any talks of peaceful negotiations as a sign of weakness, and fourth, we say the immediate cause is the Bosnian and Serbian question, with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. So that is there. So these are the major causes. Now, a bit more interesting part is what happened in the war, but that's not important from examination point of view. It's definitely interesting, but not that important. So we'll briefly talk about what happened in the war and why, or what are the characteristics of World War I. Why are we calling this as a war which is very different from any other wars, from any other war which was fought till now. Now, in terms of the war, we say that this was a war which actually involved the whole of Europe, and by implication did involve a number of European colonies also. We talked about that how Britain was involved in the war, and so British Indian troops were also involved in the war, right? And then British Indian troops were involved in World War I. We talked about it when we were talking about the Indian freedom struggle. So in a similar manner, because of the implication of the fact that Britain had, that European countries had a number of colonies in other regions, you see that these are also being involved in the war directly or indirectly. Okay, so that's there. And one of the things is that World War I and II both are called as total wars. Now, why do we call them as total wars? It's predominantly because normally in a war we say that there is a civilian and there is a civilian population and there is a military population. The war is often fought between the militaries. But in World War I, we commonly say that it is called as a total war, and so is World War II, because there is no distinction between the civilian population and the military population. In fact, the scale and the length of the war was so much and so big that from 1914 to 1919, for 5 years, you see that that almost the whole economy was geared towards meeting the requirements of the war. For example, not just the troops were fighting on behalf of the countries on the war front, but also the whole economy. For example, the whole manufacturing base was also geared towards meeting the requirements of the war. So, for example, whether it was in the manufacture of ammunition, or whether it was, and so new industries were put up primarily for the manufacturing of ammunition. Okay, and in these industries, who was working? The civilian population. Okay, so indirectly they were also contributing to their country's chances in the war. Or for example, even in the textile sector or in the agriculture sector, everything, whether the clothes or the textile products, they were also directed largely towards meeting the needs of the war. Or the food agricultural needs or agricultural produce was also, whatever agricultural produce was happening, that was also primarily being diverted towards the army. So you see that in that indirect manner, all the sections were directly or indirectly involved in strengthening the country's military, economic or other capabilities in the war. World War I, and that is why this is considered as one of the reasons why it is considered as a total war, that there was no distinction between the civilian and the military affairs. Also, we say that World War I was a war which saw the introduction of many new technologies which allowed enormous destruction of the scale that had never been witnessed in world history before. For example, you see that a number of new technologies were introduced. For example, the introduction of tanks is something that is beginning here, which gains more pace even during World War II. For example, the coming of the chemical gases, okay, or the poisonous gases like chlorine gas, etc. These poisonous gases were also used for the first time during World War I. So there were a number of new advancements in the fields of military, etc., which increased the scale of destruction that could be carried out in World War I. Now that is one of the things. Also, it is considered as a total war because you see there is a large scale involvement of the population to the extent that almost 1/4 of the total population of Europe is actually getting wiped away in these wars, World War I and World War II. So these are huge wars. The scale of destruction can also be seen in the context that roughly around 8 million people died in World War I and 20 million people were injured. So you see that it's a huge, had a huge disastrous impact upon these European countries, both the winners as well as the losers. Okay, so that's one of the things. Now what happens is that as a result of this, and now what's happening in the war, though it's a bit interesting to understand, we're not going to get into too much of it, but just about what is enough for us to understand. Now, if you look at France, Germany, Russia, and Austria, Italy, which had France, Germany, Russia, Austria, Italy was also there, but Italy had not sided. Though they were a part of the Triple Alliance, Italy had actually switched sides by the time the war broke out. And though it was a part of the Triple Alliance, though Italy was a part of the Triple Alliance, it actually did not support Germany and Austria in the war. Rather, it sided with Britain and France. Okay. Now, what happens in the war is that, and also there is the involvement of, there's also obviously the involvement of Britain. Then there is also in this war the involvement of the Ottomans. Okay. Now, later, if you will see what exactly happens in the war. These are some of the major players in the war. Now, what happens is that when Germany attacked France and Germany attacked Russia at the same point of time, this is like a two-front war that Germany found itself involved in and planning for. So you see that Germany was attacking both Britain and France, and so this was a very daring move, okay, because both France and Russia were not some small states, rather they were big players. Now France and Russia both were big players, and Germany was attacking both of them together. Now, though Russia was, given the fact that Russia was, its weakness had already been exposed in 1904, that it was not militarily very strong and it had still not brought about any major defense modernization. So it was clear to Germany that Russia would probably not be too much of a challenge. Okay, so initially what was drafted was the Schlieffen plan by Germany. So Germany said that we will divide our troops into two parts. A smaller contingent would go to the Russian border, whereas the larger contingent would go to France. So the idea was that a smaller contingent would go to the Russian border, a larger contingent would go to France, and it would quickly defeat France, and after that would move the troops to the Russian border. Until then, the small troops on the east, or small number of troops on the eastern border, will hold their own, and they can do so also because Russia is a vast country. It will take them a lot of time even to mobilize their troops from other regions. Though they had started the mobilization, it would still take them more time to mobilize the troops. So this was the plan, that they would initially quickly undo France and then move the troops on from the western border to the eastern border from the western border of Germany. So whenever we are talking of the fronts of the war, we say that there are two fronts here. Both in World War I and II, we say there are two fronts. One is the eastern front and the other is the western front. We are saying in the context of Germany. Okay, so the aim was to quickly defeat France on the western front and go back on the eastern front. But this was the plan. However, it did not work out exactly this way. To begin with, what happened was that Germany found that it had overestimated that it could easily run over France, which was not the case. And France did hold on for a long period of time. And in fact, the war started in 1914 and lasted till 1919. I've not talked about US. We'll talk about US also in a while. But what happens is, when the war breaks out, Germany attacks France. However, and initially the German attack was successful, and the French government was even pushed, and the Germans had reached almost 130 kilometers in the range of Paris, which was the center. However, from there on, the French started pushing back. And now you see on the western front, we say there was what was called as the Battle of Trenches. The trench warfare, or the Battle of Trenches, started on the western front, where basically both France and Germany pitted their armies in the region in a manner that in the French territory, the armies of both the countries were facing each other, and both had dug trenches. Okay, so France was primarily looking from a defensive position. Okay, it was not, so France was looking from a defensive position, so it was the first one to dig in the trenches. And the idea of digging in the trenches was simple, that if you dig in the trenches and you hide there, the army comes from the opposite side, you don't expose your soldiers, and with the machine gun, you can simply attack the opponent's army by hiding in the trenches. However, this was the plan that the French started with. Seeing the French, the Germans also started digging in trenches. The result was that both dug trenches on the western front, and this resulted in a sort of a stalemate. And German attack on the western front did not go through as quickly as they had wanted to. The next thing was that Germany then developed what was known as the chemical weapons. And then Germany said that, okay, if they are staying in the trenches, we will drop chlorine gas and all of these canisters, which are poisonous gases, in these trenches, and these people will die out there. There are two options: either they would die in the trenches, or they would come out of the trenches and then we'll shoot them. So that was the plan. So you see that this is what the Battle of Trenches or the trench warfare happened on the Western Front on a big scale, and this actually stalled the German expansion in the region. However, Germany was still also fighting on the Eastern Front. But in the Eastern Front, the Russian army was so bad that Russia could not hold on to its territories, even with when facing the smaller contingent of the German army. And you see that in this war, ultimately what happens is that Germany started entering the Russian territories, and a good portion of Western Russia was taken over by Russia by 1917. And we'll talk about this, that this Russian defeat in World War I also became one of the major reasons for the outbreak of the Russian Revolution. Because the king had the Russian monarch Tsar Nicholas II failed to defend the Russian territories, and the German people and the German public opinion was against involvement in the war and was to reach a peace treaty with Germany. But the Russian king, rather than attempting to find a peace treaty with Germany, actually pushed in even more troops in the war, and he himself fought in the war. And this was enough, primarily because the Russian troops faced immediate reversals. The Russians were in such a bad economic shape that they were not even paying their army on time. And obviously they were technologically inferior to the Germans. The result was that a large number of Russian troops started deserting the king on the battlefield. And this is what eventually results in the Russian defeat here. Another reason for Russian defeat was actually that Germany had joined hands with the Ottomans, and the Ottomans were the ones who were enforcing a naval blockade on Russia. Russia was dependent on import of food grains through two routes. There were only two ways Russia could import its food grains and military supplies also that it needed. It could either import food grains and military supplies through the English Channel, okay, or it could import it through the Ottoman region and through the Black Sea region, to be more precise, Crimea, Black Sea region. And here the Ottomans enforced a naval blockade, and here in the English Channel region also we will see that a naval blockade was enforced on Russia. So Russia as well as Britain. Okay, so we'll talk about naval blockade in the English Channel later, but the Ottomans imposed a naval blockade on Russia. This also became a factor for Russian defeat. Okay, and so Russia is actually getting defeated in 1917. Ultimately, there's a Russian revolution. The monarchy is overthrown in Russia, and Lenin comes to power, who signs a peace treaty with Germany, giving away the Western Russian territories to Germany under the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. This treaty was signed in 1918 by Germany and Brest, Litovsk. So this treaty was signed in 1918 between Germany and Russia. Okay. So, and with which Germany is actually ceding certain territories, a good portion of its western territories to Russia is ceding a good portion of its western territories to Germany. But if this is what was happening, we have not talked that what is happening with Britain. Now, when France was pushed on a back foot initially, obviously you see that Britain is also coming in the war. But the reason that Britain gave to enter in the war is not France. Rather, it gave the reason was that Germany first, while on the way to France, Germany also attacked another small country. Okay, and this was Belgium. You can't even see it on the map; it's that small. Okay, so Belgium was attacked by Germany first, and Belgium also had a friendship treaty with Belgium also had a friendship treaty with Britain. It was a 75-year-old friendship treaty that they had with Britain, and the British government gave this as a formal reason for pushing in troops in World War I. See, one of the things that countries and in democracies, a question was asked and should be asked is, why are you putting our army into a war which is not of your direct interest? It's another matter that whoever is being attacked by whoever, but Germany is not attacked Britain, right? So one of the things also that governments have to give is a justification for pushing in the army. So this was the justification that was offered. And you see that the British forces are also being pushed in the war. Now with British forces being pushed in the war, you see that Germany's anyway had a mattered or wanted to ensure the domination over Europe, and for that the biggest challenge would come from Britain. And for that purpose, Germany enforced a is the beginning of enforcement of naval blockades. Firstly, as Britain sent in the troops, Britain imposed a naval blockade on Germany. Basically, Germany was to see if Germany had to use the naval route, it was primarily dependent on using the English Channel. And if it had to import food grains or weapons also, it had to use the English Channel. But the British decided to crack down on the English Channel, and you see that they basically enforced a naval blockade saying that any ship to and from Germany will be shot down. Okay, so this was to impose a blockade on Germany, and in return the Germany also imposed a competing naval blockade, and with the same thing that they would shoot down any ship carrying weapons, ammunition, or any kind of assistance to Britain. Okay, and you see that Germany had relied upon the U-boats, which were the earlier versions of submarines. You've seen Dunkirk, right? That is what is happening there. That they predominantly relied upon the submarines to strike on any naval ships of Britain and or going to Britain. And also in this process, Britain is importing a lot of food grains and is also importing a lot of weapons from whom? United States. US was a major supplier of weapons and food grains to the major partners of the Triple Entente: Britain, France, and Russia. Okay, so so at this point of time, a number of US ships are supplying these materials. Now, one of the US ships which did carry some ammunitions was the US ship Lusitania. The US ship Lusitania was shot down by the German U-boats, which was largely a civilian ship. It was not a military ship, in which more than 300 people were killed, and 20 of them were US citizens also. And this was given later as an official explanation for US entry into the war. Okay, so now you see that one is leading to other. It seems that it's a chain reaction, but that's not how it is. Actually, this attack happened in 1915, but US sent in its troops only in 1917, 2 years later. So history is more complex than that. Okay, why? Because in US, the US president was against involving the US troops in the war and saying that it's not a war of our direct interest. Woodrow Wilson was against involvement in the war, but you ultimately see that this resistance is broken down by 1917. That's there, and this is given as a reason for US involvement in the war. Now, what is happening, what is to understand, one of the things also is that within this enforcement of naval blockade, Germany was also relatively successful. Germany had reduced Britain almost to a supply of 3 weeks. It had just food enough to support its population for 3 to 4 weeks at this point of time. But this was a largely destructive thing, and then you see that with the bombing of US ships in 1917, US is pushing in its troops. And with the entry of US troops in the war, you see that the balance of power is shifting in the favor of the French and the British. However, in reality, to put more perspective to this, what is to be understood is that Germany was fighting both Russia and France. Now Russia had accepted defeat in 1970 and France was still carrying out. Britain was also a major power that Germany had to deal with. So France and Britain both were a major nuisance for Germany. On top of that, there was another player here, and that's Italy. Italy, despite its small size, contributed roughly 6 lakh troops in the war, which was very significant amount of troops, given the fact that if you look at US troops involved in the war, the US troops were merely 70,000 US troops. So US sent in only 70,000 troops, that too by the end of 1917. And Italy is pushing in 6 lakh troops, okay, which is a much smaller country. So it's not just that US troops is what is tilting the war, they are entering the war and that is why the war is getting tilted. But it's because Germany is unable to advance on the Western Front, and British and the French troops, also the Italian troops, became a major point of discord, which Germany found it relatively difficult to implement. And you see that is the reason why Germany is eventually getting defeated. And you see that in the Battle of Normandy, which is considered one of the major battles of World War I on the Western Front. In the Battle of Normandy on the Western Front, you see that the British troops managed to land on the western coast. That's what you're seeing in Dunkirk. But though it's not about Normandy, but it's a similar situation to that. Okay, that the British troops were trying to land on the French shores, and the Germany was enforcing the naval blockade, and that is what is constantly a very destructive aspect of the war. But ultimately, they managed to do so. In the Battle of Normandy, the US troops were also pushed in, the Canadian troops also enter actually, and by then it's clear that Germany would find it very difficult to hold on to its own, and that is the case. And you see that the Germans and the Ottomans are the ones who are facing eventual defeat, and the result is that by 1918 they are eventually defeated, and in 1919 you see the peace conferences were called in Paris, where you see the signing of the Treaty of Versailles and a couple of other treaties that will, the Treaty of Service, etc. There were a number of other treaties also that were signed, and with which a number of limitations were imposed on Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire, the major losers. The Ottoman Empire, we had already talked about the Khilafat question, right? Austria and Germany had to deal with a number of limitations that we'll talk about later. Clear? This much? Okay. Now, I'm not writing this क्योंकि ये कोई नहीं पूछेगा आपसे कि किसने किसको कैसे मारा, कौन किससे कैसे लड़ा. But I've given this still. I've given some of these important points in the PowerPoint presentation, where we talked about competing naval blockades, the Schlieffen Plan, the US entry into the war, and the reasons for US entry into the war. I've given some of the broad points that are enough to paint a picture. Okay, so that's it, because nobody is going to ask you or discuss the events of World War I. That kind of a question doesn't come. Okay, yes, the question comes on other impact of World War I, consequences of World War I, Treaty of Versailles, etc. A lot of things are important, but they are in terms of impacts, which are separate questions, not in terms of events. Okay. So, any doubts still here?
Why Italy helped France and Britain?
Pardon? Why Italy helped France and Britain? The answer will become clear, because in Italy's assessment, it was France and Britain who were more likely to win. And if at all Italy was also to be on the winning side, it could get a number of territories from Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman empires, which were their colonies in North Africa or other regions. Okay. Huh? They could, yeah, and Italy could get a number of colonies in a number of regions that was there.
So Britain was superior in naval. How can Germany put a naval blockade?
So, so what he's asking is that Britain is superior to Germany in terms of naval strength. Then how can Germany enforce a naval blockade? No, both did enforce a naval blockade, because from 1890s onwards, they had been moving towards strengthening their navy. So they were the world's first ones to make the submarine kind of a thing, which was never made by them. So the British were using the naval frigates. Okay, they were using the naval ships, the aircraft carriers, and they were only using predominantly the submarines. Okay, that's there. So that's the reason why they are able to enforce a naval blockade. Okay, we'll talk about consequences, etc. later in the next class. Okay, so we'll stop here. In the next class, we'll start from World War I end onwards and talk about Russian Revolution and other things.
Exam